Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Gigi El-Bayoumi, the founding director of the Rodham Institute. We are housed in the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and we are dedicated to improving health equity. We just watched a film that was extremely powerful. It certainly evoked a lot of emotions for me and taught me a lot, actually. There's a lot that I learned from it. Before I bring on our illustrious panel tonight, I'd first like to start off by thanking Ms. Christina Williams, who is the Director of Community Engagement at the Rodham Institute, for, as always, helping to put this on and to promote this. She's just really, I can't say enough good things about her. She's been so active, particularly during the COVID pandemic, of getting meals to people, masks to people, and just making community members that are sometimes overlooked or forgotten feel that people care about them, they're valued, and they're loved. So thank you, Ms. Christina. I'd also like to thank Will, and of course I've forgotten Will's last name, and hopefully Ms. Christina can save me and put it in the chat so that I can thank him properly. We have brought 3 different discussants tonight, and we certainly want to hear from them. Oh, Will Hilbert, and you'll tell me what the organization that he's part of too. Thank you. But we certainly want to allow for a discussion as well, and hearing from different audience members, your perspectives, your reactions, and your sentiments. He's part of the picture motion productions. I'm sorry. That's Will Hilbert. He's the one that brought this movie to us and is getting us to actually screen it before it even hits HBO. So we feel very fortunate for that. So, for this movie in the context of what is happening all around the country, but it's specifically in Washington, D.C., is really sobering. And so to help us sort of unpack and discuss this a little bit more, I'm going to ask our 3 discussants to come on, Mr. Lee, Ms. Lieb, and Ms. Banach. Okay, I wanted to make sure I pronounced everybody's name properly. So Mr. Lee, can you first introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and what you do?
All right, sure. My name is Andre Lee. I am a native Washingtonian, 64 years here. I am the Director of Community Engagement at Brooklyn Manor, which is right off Rhode Island Avenue and 14th Street Northeast, a housing complex up there, right off the strip, as you want to say. As the Director of Community Engagement, I am tasked with bringing the community and the ownership, Midcity development together. And when I say together, I mean that there has been some tension there because of the new development that is going on, and people feel that they will be moved out. Mm-hmm. And I'm there because I lived in that area all my life, and it's like a full circle coming back around. So the people trust me and believe in what I say, and that's my job, is to let them know that, no, we're not going to move anyone out of here. If you want to stay, you have the right to stay. You've been here before it got or will be looking better. So that's what my task, and dealing with the PUD. I don't want to get too far ahead of the PUD because people won't understand, but it stands for Planning Unit Development.
Okay, well, thank you. Ms. Lieb, can you kindly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Loren Lieb, and I'm coming to you from Southern California, sunny Southern California. It rained yesterday, so that was a really big deal here. because we had an injured brain. But anyway, I have been a gun violence prevention advocate for 20 plus years. And my advocacy started after an incident in which one of my children was injured in a shooting. It was a hate motivated attack at a Jewish community center where my kids were attending summer day camp. My two boys were there. They were 6 years old and 8 years old at the time. The 6-year-old was shot. The 8-year-old, along with hundreds of other children, were there at the time that this neo-Nazi came in with semi-automatic weapons and high-capacity magazines and fired about 70 rounds, injured 5 people. The shooter then left and murdered a Filipino-American postal worker who was delivering mail. He was on his rounds delivering mail. That was, to say the least, a big wake-up call for me. I mean, now that I look back on it, I'm really basically ashamed at how ignorant and naive I was about the issue of gun violence. I thought, you know, I assumed I was safe in my neighborhood. And I realized now that that was, you know, not the right way to think about it. And that really none of us are safe anywhere. And so this is, it's a public health issue, and it's epidemic in our country. And I come at this from a background of public health. I'm an epidemiologist. I spent my career at the Los Angeles County Public Health Department as an epidemiologist in a variety of different programs. And then for my advocacy, I'm on the board of Women Against Gun Violence, which is a Los Angeles-based gun violence prevention organization that was founded more than 25 years ago. And we are women and men, not just women, but women and men working, founded by Anne Rice Lane and Betty Friedan, the feminist Betty Friedan. Anne Rice Lane is still an active member of our board and the organization. And I also have been connected with Brady, the gun violence prevention organization Brady, and have been involved with a chapter that formed here as an outgrowth of the shooting that happened in 1999 at the Jewish Community Center. So I come at it from a personal and professional, and just need to be involved and do something that I think is important.
How's your son now?
He's good. He's 28 now, married, a 15-month-old daughter. You know, went through his periods with problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, but was fortunate enough to be able to get services, and he's doing well now. And he is on the board of Women Against Gun Violence as well. He's an advocate as well. And he, you know, very strong feelings that he feels that he can offer things to people. And especially because, you know, he was 6 years old when he was shot. So he knows what it's like to kind of grow up. That whole changes who you are. And so he can relate to young children. He can relate to, he does a lot on his own in terms of gun violence prevention.
I'm so glad that he's okay, and thank you for joining us. Ms. Liz, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Liz Banach. I run Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence, a small state-based organization here. I was raised in rural Virginia, and I often tell people I was named after my father's mentor and college professor, and my sister was actually named after my father's gunsmith. My father was an avid hunter, and guns were a huge part of both the culture I grew up in and my family's sort of personal narrative. My husband and I moved to Maryland. To the day, it was 3 weeks before our second child was born. We moved down from New York City, where I had been a psychotherapist in private practice for several years. My husband moved down here to work with the Obama administration on the Affordable Care Act. And at that point, I sort of put my private practice on hold and stayed at home with the children. And I can remember it was my daughter's 3rd birthday. And my husband said, we're having the party at home. I'm going to take the kids out. Our daughter loved this carousel. And he said, I'm going to take the children to the mall where there's this carousel. And Eleanor will get to ride the carousel, and it'll be great. And such a wonderful way to kick off her 3rd birthday. And as I'm decorating the cake, I get this call from my mother, and she said, where are you? And I said, well, I'm home. I'm getting ready for the birthday party. And she said, oh, thank goodness, because there's an active shooting situation at the mall. And it probably only took 3 minutes to find out that they'd actually decided to go to the nature center instead. But those 3 minutes, the most terrifying 3 minutes of my life. And Loren, I can't even begin to imagine what your family experienced and the trauma. I mean, my heart goes out to you and all the families whose stories were captured in this movie. It's just devastating to me. But that night, I reached out to a local advocacy organization and said, I just want to do whatever I can do. Like this was a wake-up call for me. And that was 8 years ago. And, my career trajectory, I'm now the executive director of this small nonprofit, really, really proud. We have an advocacy arm, a programmatic side, happy to talk more about what we do. But, I think that it's, one of the things I'm really proud about that we lead is we have a Maryland Violence Prevention Coalition, which is all sort of focused on public health approach to gun violence prevention. And we co-lead that with the Community Justice Action Foundation, which is an organization that works to address what the sort of intersection of criminal justice and gun violence prevention. So that's one of my proudest parts of my work. And I'm just really honored to be a part of this panel. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Sure. So now your daughter is 11? I did the math right.
Almost. Countdown's on. She's got her birthday list already. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's start off with you. What were your impressions of the film? What do you think that the film, towards its emphasis, and are there things that you would have emphasized more or less, but just sort of overall impressions?
There were 2 quotes that really stood out to me in the movie. And the first was the former president of the NRA, who said the difference between gun owners and others is gun owners vote. And I think there's just so much power in that, and we all need to listen to that. And the other is when former President Clinton said, this country doesn't really have this sense of mutual responsibility. And I think both of those quotes just really struck me so hard. I think that, the gun lobby has been so successful because it really represents an industry, right? It represents manufacturers and, money, right? Like it's really survived because of this. And because it's been able to sort of build around this culture of people who are willing to make this their single issue voting, what they'll vote on. I mean, we know all the statistics, we know most people kind of agree with what we say, but there is this contingent of folks who will vote on this issue and vote on this issue alone. And then, to what President Clinton said, the sort of, and I think it's a uniquely sort of American mentality, the sort of singular, very focused, very self-preservation, but I think that there's this problem. And Mr. Lee, I think that, your work probably speaks a lot to this. I think that we need to be so much more invested in our communities and our neighbors, and what the way that our lives impact the lives of other people. And obviously, the choice to own a gun is a choice that impacts other people, and the choice, to move to a neighborhood and to choose to, make that, neighborhood a community that maybe makes harder for people who've been there for generations to live in. I mean, we have to think about the impact our decisions have on other people. And I think that's something that we as Americans have not really been taught to do, and something that we need to think about, and how that plays out in the gun conversation.
Well, there's no question about that point, in that it is to the detriment of our overall health. I mean, this idea that I will do whatever for myself and not caring about the rest of the community, even family members, is really why we're in such a fix with the COVID vaccinations. And when you look at other, not just COVID vaccinations, but even just covering masks and all that, if you look at other countries, people actually care about their neighbors and will decide to, oh, I better mask up because, you know, Mrs. Jones down the street is in an immunocompromised, you know, way. So I think that, you know, your points can really transcend not just this particular issue that we're talking about, but everything. Mr. Lee, what were your thoughts on the movie, on the film, not the movie, the film? I was taught that those are two different things, but anyway.
Whoa, I was just devastated with it, especially the situation that Black and brown people are the main people that are getting the guns in to their neighborhood and also are getting killed at a higher rate. I think it said 14%, right? Greg Jackson, who's a good friend of mine, spoke and is someone that experienced gun violence. In the community that I'm in, Dr. Gigi, you know the neighborhood. I mean, there is a shooting out of the week, 2 to 3 out of the week in that community. And why? Because it's so easy to get guns in this city. It is so easy. And the movie just really grabbed me to the point that the kids, the youth that are 18 and older need to really understand that your vote matters. Your vote can stop a killing. Just think about that. That's one quote in the movie that I was touched on, and it's true. Your vote can stop a killing. So it was a real touching, and I got more to talk about the movie, and just being in the community that has that type of violence every day, seem like, and watching that movie really touched me. It really did.
Well, you know, one of the things that was brought up is that every time there is some, you know, the country is on the verge of some big social change, right? That gun violence increases, police violence increases. So, you know, with the Kennedy assassination, obviously, all of Barack Obama, and then of course, I mean, there are just so many things that have come up where really the people that promote the, you know, gun rights issues, do you believe that that's a code for something else, like you know, sort of white race superiority or racist rhetoric, I should say, in general?
Do I believe it? I looked at the movie. Every meeting that the NRA had, I looked to see if there were any Black or brown people at the meeting. I saw none. Maybe you may have seen one or two. I saw none. I took it from there.
I thought that was a really important point that was made early in the movie. Sorry, film. Forgive me, I'm of a different generation, so I have to. I guess it's a documentary film. Movie is if it's fiction. So, so Ms. Lieb, you know, you've got your perspective of obviously having lived through the horror of having a child being shot, and you're also, you know, in public health with that lens, and you're, you know, a human being from a minority group that has been targeted by
And often
hate.
often scapegoated.
Right. Well, you can join the club. I think these since the previous administration, the tent has gotten bigger,
Yeah,
right?
it did, yeah.
So, but tell me, what were your sort of reflections on the movie, on the film?
Well, when I watched this film, my immediate response was, I feel like this should be required viewing for every person living in this country. Just absolutely required viewing, because people need to understand a little bit more about the National Rifle Association. And I'm not talking about the members. I'm talking about the leadership, the current leadership of the National Rifle Association. The film did a lot to help expose what it used to be a reputable marksmanship and firearm safety organization. And it was a deliberate maneuver to change it into a lobbying organization. And the leadership of the NRA, I mean, it's mind-boggling to me when you watch David Keene and David, I think that's his first name, and Wayne LaPierre and Harlan Carter. These people have hearts of stone. I mean, they just absolutely don't give a damn about people's lives. They don't give a damn about you or me or anyone's safety. And they try to pretend like they're like they care. They want you to protect yourself and protect your family. What they want to do is protect the profits of the firearm industry. So they have to foment fear. They have to create paranoia. They have to make people believe that they need to buy weapons, that, every social change that they see coming is, it's a threat to your way of life. It's a threat to your freedom. It's a threat to your safety, so that people will run out and buy guns. They don't really care if you're safe or you're not safe. If they cared, they would promote gun safety legislation. If they cared about your safety, they would work to ensure that firearms are made more safe. Yes, it's inherently a dangerous object, but there could be safety features on guns that make them a little bit safer for people to be handling. But they don't do that. They've actively blocked everything that might make a level playing field. They've made it so that we can't sue the gun industry. They've made it so that there is little research on public health research on prevention of firearm injury and death. They've just carved out a special place for themselves where they can act without oversight. It's the only industry that doesn't have any health and safety oversight. That was kind of referenced in the film. And just so many things. And so obviously it makes me really, really angry. And I want more people to know about this kind of stuff, because maybe then they'd, see that this is really, it is a solvable problem. Because I think too many people just like, oh no, this is like, what are we going to do? There's so many guns in the United States. What can we possibly do now? Well, I keep feeling like the house of cards is starting to crumble. And I'm feeling it even more. The last election, there was a lot of people running on a gun violence prevention platform. The NRA their finances are being looked at, and corporations are cutting their ties with the NRA. So I cross my fingers. I hope that the NRA goes away or becomes a legitimate organization once again that is involved with marksmanship and safety, and not a political agenda that I do believe is, has some basis in racism and scapegoating of people when white men feel under threat.
Ms. Liz, your background is psychotherapy, and certainly the COVID has taken a mental health toll on everybody. And so we're seeing especially sadly among young people, the suicide rates really going up. And again, this is disproportionately impacting Black and brown youth. I think that gun violence, we tend to think of it when there's a shooting at the mall, but we also forget that it's also about people harming themselves, right? So that simple things like simply putting a safety on a gun or keeping the bullets and the gun separate can help to prevent a tragedy such as a suicide. But for you, how should we think about gun violence? Is that something that gets included, or is it stuff that sort of has to have mass casualties, or what is the definition?
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I so often think that mental health is used as a red herring and sort of inappropriately in this discussion. Most people who suffer from mental health issues are not the problem here, but 60% of gun violence is suicides. And as you said, it's increasing a lot among young children of color and their adolescents, which is a huge, huge problem. And my organization right now, we're going back, I think this is our 6th year right now. And we have a very, very weak child access prevention law in Maryland. We know that strong child access prevention laws help prevent adolescent suicides. Suicides are a very often impulsive act. The evidence shows very clearly upwards of 90% or more of people who attempt suicide and are not successful in their attempt go on to get the help they need, the intervention they need, and live healthy, good, long lives. The problem is when you use the gun in that attempt, the likelihood that you're going to survive that is very, very, very low. Our child access prevention law has been shown in other states to have a huge impact in reducing suicides among children. And those horrific unintentional shootings that you all hear about when a toddler gets a weapon. Not only that, it also helps with the diversion of guns into the underground market. What Mr. Lee was talking about, it is not fair. And this, again, is, I think, an industry issue and something that we really need to be pointing to the gun industry, that we have flooded communities with these guns, these communities that are disproportionately poor, disproportionately Black and brown, and then we sort of put our hands up in the air and say, well, this is their problem, we don't know what to do. It's not. It's a gun industry problem, it's a regulation problem, and it's a problem that we can solve. It's also a public health problem. Mr. Lee made reference to Greg Jackson. Greg and I are the ones who run the Maryland Violence Prevention Coalition. I'm really, really proud of this. And in that work, so much of that work is about violence intervention prevention, preventing violence before it actually erupts, right? So what's better? Do you want sort of a Band-Aid where someone's already picked up the gun and you're going to have to bring charges against that person? And there are all sorts of issues with that, with criminal justice, or do we want to go into a community and make sure the community has the resources and the tools they need so that violence isn't taking over the community? And we've seen with credible messengers. I mean, I think Mr. Lee is probably one of these credible messengers,
Yes.
who's known within the community, someone who's part of the community, who can say to the community, hey, you trust me, and here are some your tools you can use so that you don't have to use a gun. So yes, there are solutions to the problem of suicide. There are solutions to the problems of community violence. And I think it just takes a willingness and investment. And again, this issue of mutual responsibility, that I care about what's happening to my neighbors in Baltimore, that I care about what's happening to my neighbors in Washington, D.C., and that I also care about my rural communities where suicide is a huge problem, because those are the two big problems we have in this country: community violence in urban areas and suicides in rural areas. It's a little simplistic, but that's the vast majority of the problem. And I was brought to this because of something that was sort of a high profile shooting, but it's really those community issues that have sort of kept me here and really engaged me and my passion in this movement.
Mr. Lee, you've talked about there being 2 to 3 shootings a week, and I know that the numbers have increased since COVID. I think we're going to surpass a record. Why do you think that is? And more importantly, what do you see as potential solutions that you have enacted, or other models that are out there that can be useful? But what do you think is the reason for these numbers increasing?
I think the reason that is ticking up is the pandemic. You had nowhere to go. You couldn't get a job. Okay, that was out. No one was hiring during the pandemic. So the ones that were already on the street, now they're having turf wars with the other side of town because no one's making any money, because no one got a job. No one is getting a check to make some money. So now you got turf wars going on between this side and that side. And the guns are so accessible that compounds the issue. What I think can be done, what I'm doing now is working with government partners, working with you all, working with store owners, business owners, and saying to them, look, we have to do something. We have to give these kids hope, a sense of hope. They don't have a sense of hope anymore. And when you lose a sense of hope, man, that's rough. That's rough. You don't even have a reason they think for living. I mean, the actions that's going on now, they don't care whether it's broad daylight or police around the corner. They don't care anymore. The sense of hope has to be brought back to the community. And that's where I'm trying to do my best, right there.
They're obviously, it's obviously a complex problem, but you're right. Alienation, if you don't feel that you matter, if you disappeared tomorrow and it wouldn't matter, is coupled with hope, is coupled with the access to guns, is coupled to, poverty and education and all of these things. So clearly a way which I think the public health system is much better at than, let's say, the healthcare system and sometimes the government, at really looking at things holistically. So Ms. Lieb, what are some models that have proved to be successful at a community level for gun violence prevention?
Well, and I just wanted to make one quick comment in response to something that Mr. Lee said, because it just struck me. I was attending a discussion, and there was a young man. He had been a gang member. This was in LA, and he'd been shot several times, and had then later gotten his life turned around and was involved with the local organization. And I forget how somehow the question came up about college, and he said, I never thought I'd live long enough to go to college. So he had just written his life off before he ever, got old enough to get himself figured out. And it's just starting, it was so sad that that's the way he felt, and talk about, no hope, that he had no hope in his life about what he was going to do. Well, I was thinking about, what we know are the social determinants of health, because people don't exist in a vacuum. There are factors that affect a person's abilities and their health and their, the things they're able to do. And it has to do with their economic stability, with education, with their own health and their healthcare, their neighborhood and their built environment, and their whole social and community environment. Whether you have a support system, do you have a faith group that you belong to? Do you, are you getting a good education? Do you have financial opportunities to get a job and all this kind of stuff? And so clearly there are no single quick fixes to this, but if we could at least take guns out of the mix, that would go a long way in, helping people to at least live long enough to figure out what they want to do with their life. And so, there's a lot of initiatives right now, and I'm not really going to talk about community violence intervention programs because that's certainly not my area of expertise. But I think, the whole issue of educating the public around the issue of guns, making sure that people understand if you have a gun, then you have to be a responsible gun owner and you have to store your gun properly. Make sure they know what the laws are in where they live about child access prevention. We happen to have strong child access prevention laws in California. People don't always seem to know about that. And so we're doing our best, especially at Women Against Gun Violence and other organizations, to make sure that people understand, if you have a gun, how's the safe way to store it? What do you do with it? Make sure people know that, well, you might be bringing this gun into your home because you think it's going to make you safer. You think you'll be able to protect yourself and your family, but that's not really the case. We know that having a gun in your home increases the risk of a homicide, suicide, or an unintentional shooting. So, make sure people know about safe storage. And really the bottom line, and Liz, I pulled out the same quote from the film about gun owners vote. And so really what we need to do is have elected leaders who care about this issue as well, and who are willing to stand up to the NRA, because there can be, the legislation is not the only answer to this, but it will help us in many aspects if we have gun violence restraining orders, so that people who are experiencing emotional crisis can have their gun temporarily removed. We do need to have a background check for every firearm sale. We don't need to have assault weapons and other military style weapons on our streets. So some of the solutions are legislative, but we also need to talk about prevention. And again, in the film, after Sandy Hook, and Wayne LaPierre's proposal is that we should have armed guards in every school. Well, how does that, I always really kind of wonder how people who think they're going to have a gun for self-protection, or that an armed person, no matter where you are, whether it's a store, a movie theater, you name it, any place in public where you might be, how does that work? That firearm you have in your home isn't everywhere you are, I guess, unless you carry it on your hip, which maybe some people do inside their home. But even if you have an armed guard at a school, at your place of worship, wherever, the shooter comes in, they have the element of surprise. So yes, the armed person can respond, but to me, what that's telling you is the first few people that get shot are the sacrifice. We have to be willing to accept that a couple of people are going to get shot before the armed response can react. And I'm not willing to sacrifice that. And, throughout the film, when the gun rights extremists are saying, well, people who die, that is the price of our freedom. Well, they've got it all wrong. They've got it.
But they're usually talking about other people, not themselves, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's the problem.
Exactly.
So Ms. Williams, I believe that there is somebody that wants to make a comment or ask a question.
I will let him in, Mr. Gartek, I believe. I'll allow him to speak. There he is.
Yeah, hi, can anybody hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, let's see. I guess my question, because I made a comment that you talked about how some of these gun folks are single issue people, but they're in a position where they can be, because they're so conservative that all they got to do is vote Republican and they get the gun stance they want and everything else they want. So it's kind of easy for them to do that. But the thing that I see that a lot of folks in the gun violence prevention community don't take into consideration is some of the history of our gun laws. And the gun law that I think you should really get to know better is the 1934 National Firearms Act. It was because of all the gang stuff that was going on during Prohibition. And so they passed a law on machine guns, automatic weapons, and some other specialty stuff they call destructive devices that are really, they're designed primarily for use in some insidious manner, like a cane gun. or a firearm that's disguised as a camera. Now, so they passed this law in 34 and regulated all this stuff, short-barreled rifles and shotguns, sawed-off shotguns. That's all part of the 1934 NFA. And to this day, there's 600 plus thousand of these weapons in private hands. Okay.
So what, please clarify. So what did the law do? Prevent them or permit them? I'm not clear. Forgive me.
Well, you have to register the weapon if you own one, and you have to pay a stamp fee of $200, which hasn't changed since 1934. It's still $200, but they regulated it. They're registered, they fingerprint you, they send data, the federal government, the FBI sends data to the local police or county sheriff where you reside, and they actually either come over and tell you how to store the thing, or they send you something in the mail and you have to do whatever you have to undergo whatever regulations they locally require. Now, since 1934, with all these weapons in private hands, they had 5 deaths, 2 murders, 1 self-defense, and 2 accidents. And that's the God's honest truth. You can look it up, go to the BATFE, or talk to anybody that's really knowledgeable about gun laws. This thing has been a smashing success. And all it does is it requires safe storage, and or the weapon has to be dismantled when it's not in use. It has to be registered. And the fingerprint thing, and then the $200, and that's it. And it's worked that well. Now, you take an AR-15 rifle, that's a semi-automatic rifle that's legal to own. AR-15s are used in so many shootings, mass shootings anyway. The M16 is the military version. It's got the button you flip to fire like a machine gun. None of those have ever been used in a crime. And it's because of that law. And European countries have designed their gun regulations after our NFA.
That's so interesting. Thank you for that education. I think it's always curious about how laws are implemented, and because I was certainly clueless about that. But you know, you talk about other countries. We're the worst, right? We lead the world in this. But I see, Ms. Liz, that you would like to react to that statement.
No, I mean, I think that's a fascinating history lesson. One thing I will say is that there's very, very clear evidence that background checks alone don't work. And I think that that's a really important thing just to be honest about. Background checks alone don't work. And Brent, what you're saying, I think highlights an important thing. What we do know that does work is what we call a permit to purchase. And this is something that actually my Senator, Senator Van Hollen has tried to pass on the federal level. And we did pass here in Maryland, and I know states like California and other more progressive states have. And why it works is because the fingerprint is so key in that issue of diversion to the underground market. And that helps with the flooding of these guns into the underground market. So states like Maryland, when you buy a regulated firearm, you have to get licensed prior to purchasing that gun. You have to be fingerprinted prior to purchasing that gun. I've gone through this process. I have a literal card that I can take to, I've never actually done this, but I just want to know what the process was like. So I have to go into the store, show that I am a licensed person who can buy this gun. I had to take a class. You know, it is a process, and I think that is an important step in safety and securing and literally just like teaching, right? So I will be the first one to say that the sort of the rhetoric that background checks alone are going to work, they're not.
Well, and you know, you bring up a good point. When we are driving a car or a vehicle that has the potential to kill people, we have to go through a process of, you know, getting educated, taking a test to make sure that we can actually operate a vehicle. And then if we are not operating it properly, there are consequences for that. So it's interesting to me how something like guns or vaccines have become so politicized when, as a society, we agree to follow certain things, right? You can't just go through a red light. You can't any longer not wear a seatbelt. You can't drink and drive. You no longer can smoke, indoors. I mean, all of these things are part of our social contract. And to politicize it and say, no, well, that's my freedom. Frankly, I think that some of the public health messaging about this, or even the political messaging, has not been really robust. And the problem is that when you look at who is in control of the narrative and who pours millions of dollars and is really polished on this, it is people who have these extremist views. And just like you mentioned, Ms. Lieb, that when you have an armed guard in front of a synagogue, for example, then that's always in a reactive way. I sometimes feel that people who care about these issues of gun safety and so forth, we're always reacting to this extremely well organized, extremely well funded group. And so the end of the movie for me really, to me, provided what I think is the secret sauce. And the secret sauce is that we may not have the big bucks, but we do have numbers. And voting becomes really important. And voting, not just, I think sometimes people think voting just for the president. No, it's voting actually for those, city council or, whoever's a tax collector or whatever. Because frankly, that is exactly what happened after Obama was elected. You saw the Koch brothers going into state legislatures, giving them templates about what they should pass, and got a lot of the rights of people just taken away. So anyway, that's my little spiel here, but other thoughts?
I agree. That what Liz was saying, we have some laws on the table right now. That didn't stop. And I just want to give this scenario. I'm riding up the street delivering broad daylight now. About 1:30, delivering. I have a food ministry. And I see two kids running down the street with hoods on. And I don't know, and I'm looking and I think one of them has a gun. It looks like it. So coming behind them running is another kid with a gun drawn. We're talking 1:30, broad daylight. And they start shooting on the street. I'm at the light, like, God, let me get past this light. That I know they ain't went to no fire range. So, I don't want guns taken away from the right people. And sure, look, there were guns before me, okay? But these guns are illegal weapons. And what Mr. Brent said about the guns and the licenses and all that, yeah, that's cool too. But these other folks get these same guns that you're talking about, and they don't have license.
Well, I mean, I think has to be in the greater context. We are now living in a very chaotic time in our planet right now. COVID has taken us off the rails in many ways. I mean, as a person who sees patients almost daily, I can tell you people are really struggling. And there have been articles written about it in the popular press about why is everybody so rude? Why is everybody so angry? It's because everybody's on edge. And then you add a weapon, a gun into the mix. It's no wonder that gun violence is going. We don't have our communities in general, our societies have gotten so fragmented that the structures that are used to be in place that would check our behaviors are no longer there. So let's take a simple example. When you're driving a car and somebody cuts you off, When I was in my hometown of East Lansing, Michigan, I would probably know that person and I couldn't just yell at them, right? Now everything's very anonymous. You don't know who's around you. You don't feel that sense of obligation. I think, Liz, you were going to say something. I may have interrupted.
Oh no, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think there've been lots of chaotic times in our history, right? And I keep on returning to this idea of like mutual responsibility. My husband is the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, right? And I think about the trauma that they experienced, and they were able to go to Israel, and from Israel they came here, and they were surrounded by a community that helped them, that provided them with resources, and they went from being teenagers who lost everything, their family, their livelihoods, everything, to having a grandson who was able to graduate from an Ivy League law school. And I think about this, and I think about like what helped that, right? And part of it is there was a community willing to come together and help these people and to recognize their trauma. And I think that we as a country need to do that when we look at our gun violence problem. And we need to look at the trauma in communities like Mr. Lee is helping. We need to look at trauma in communities that are rural and dealing with the suicide issue. I think we need to have a sense of a sense that we need to take care of each other, right? Like there have been awful times in this country's history before, in this world's history before, where things have been horrible. And I think we can turn to those periods and we can see some really awful ways that we've responded to those times and some really good ways we have responded to them. And I think it's imperative now that we not become divisive, that we don't look at gun owners as exclusively the problem, that we don't look at children who are living in communities that are disproportionately impacted by violence as being the problem, but we instead try to look at like, how can we have a common dialogue with people who are gun owners? How can we help children who are choosing to turn to guns, to give them the resources they need so they don't have to? I think there are things we need to do as just global citizens to be invested in our world and to take some ownership over these problems.
Yes, I agree with you, but I give you a little pushback in terms of the chaotic time. I think what's unique is that the collective quarantining that we all had to do almost entirely as a planet, I don't know that that's actually ever happened before. There is something unique and different about this. But anyway, it's chaotic, it's like talking about the level of hurt. In a way, it doesn't matter in that we have to deal with that. And I think the experience certainly in the African diaspora of multiple generations, hundreds of years of just not even having the rights. I mean, look at just during COVID, we in Washington, D.C. were only given 1/3 of the funds for the COVID relief fund because Washington, D.C. is a territory, it's not a state. And that goes back to the fact that it used to be Chocolate City. That's not the case anymore. But these policies that are embedded, that really are part of the roots of this country, which really includes racism and greed, sadly, but violence. That is really, sadly, a part of what this country is about. Now, having said that, I think that the social experiment that is the United States of America has such diverse people that if we got our act together, we could actually be a leader in the positive sense, but we got some work to do. I'm gonna just go through everybody and make sure that you have a chance to give us your closing remarks, starting with you, Mr. Lee.
Well, I love the video, the movie, the documentary, whatever we want to call it. I loved it. I'm going to keep fighting to get these guns safely off the streets. And in my community, I'm going to keep fighting for the rights of the community to stay in their community and give them hope so they won't have to do this. Education, get them the education that they need, and just keep fighting and being an advocate for community. That's what I love.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Lee, for joining us. Ms. Lieb.
It's been a long fight, and we're still in it. We always say this is a marathon, not a sprint. And every year, 100,000, 120,000 people in the United States are impacted directly by gun violence, either injured or killed. And when the ripples go out from that to their families, their friends, their colleagues, it's huge numbers of people, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. And I just feel that at some point we are going to reach a critical mass of people who say, enough. We cannot tolerate this anymore. It is a completely unacceptable way to live our lives. And, to address in the film, the people that want to keep saying, well, once they take our guns away, then what's next? Well, that's not what anyone is proposing. What we are trying to propose is a way to coexist with firearms that people don't die needlessly. There are so many preventable deaths occurring just from careless storage or from people experiencing an emotional crisis who just shouldn't be near a gun. If we could address these things openly and honestly, I mean, that's a lot of it. If we could just be honest about it, separate the commerce from the public health. There's lots of gun owners that are in 100% agreement that we need to do something about gun violence, that the gun lobby is not representing their interests. And so we can fix this. We can fix it if enough people get engaged and are willing to talk about it, do something about it, vote related to it. Well, someday we'll fix it.
Thank you. Ms. Liz, you've got the final word.
Yeah, I want to thank the Rodham Institute for putting this conversation on. I think this is such a key part in doing exactly what Loren said, and changing this narrative, changing the conversation, helping people understand what this is about, that it's not about grabbing guns or taking away rights, but it's about making sure that our communities can be safer and that everybody has the right to live in a safe community. And I just want to thank, Mr. Lee and Loren so much for all that they have done. This movement only has gotten as far as it has because of people like that who have committed so much of their time and energy and life to this effort. And, my final word is vote. If we don't make this an issue we vote on, it doesn't, the gun lobby is going to keep on patting the pockets of folks and making sure that votes there don't go the way that the vast majority, because I think we've actually won most of the battles. I think most people already agree with us. We just need representation in Washington, D.C. to better represent that. So this is an issue that you all need to consider when you are voting. And as Loren said, people are running on this issue. It's become an issue that people talk about. They're not scared to talk about anymore. And you really need to celebrate the folks who have the courage to do that. Send them money to, anything you can do. But again, thank you guys so much for making this a conversation, for keeping this dialogue going.
Well, thank you to each and every one of you, to the people that have joined us for this after film discussion. Please share this film. It's going to be on HBO. You can watch it, I think, for the rest of the week. We've got it for a week, so you can share it with others. And again, I'd like to thank Ms. Christina Williams who is the the director of our community engagement, for helping to put this on. And I wish that everybody stays safe and healthy and happy. We're going into Halloween. Please make sure that the kids are safe. Please make sure that if you're driving around them to please, especially those electric cars, let me tell you, you cannot hear electric cars. I almost got hit today by an electric car because I didn't hear it. And it was coming around the corner. So for children, that's another area of safety. Please be safe. Okay, thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.